After starting this module, you shall be able to major objectives of fiscal policy of India and learn how the economic environment is influenced with the help of providing incentives and disincentives. Know how the budgetary resources of an economy are allocated for balanced economic growth and economic stability. Appreciate how the different instruments of fiscal policy help to achieve the objectives.
Let us first understand the concept of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is a policy of government. It relates to raising of government revenue and incurring of government expenditure. Government formulates a budgetary policy for the purpose of deciding upon its revenue generation and expenditure. Fiscal policy has to decide on the extent and form of flow of expenditure from the government to the economy and from the economy back to the government. So, in broad term, fiscal policy refers to that segment of national economic policy which is primarily concerned with the receipts and expenditure of central government. In other words, fiscal policy refers to the policy of the government with regard to taxation, public expenditure, and public borrowing. We shall now study the various objectives of fiscal policy. These are effective mobilization of resources. The chief objective of fiscal policy is to ensure economic growth and development. It can be achieved by mobilization of financial resources. The central and state government mobilize resources through various means. Taxation. Government levies various kinds of direct taxes as well as indirect taxes because most important source of resource mobilization in India is taxation. Public and private savings. Government can raise resources from private and public sector. Resources can be mobilized through government borrowings by ways of treasury bills, issue of government bonds, etc., loans from domestic and foreign parties, and by deficit financing. Efficient allocation of financial resources. Financial resources must be allocated in the best possible way for the development of Indian economy. These resources are allocated for development activities which includes expenditure on railways, infrastructure, etc. While non-development activities includes expenditure on defense, interest payments, subsidies, etc. We focus our fiscal policy in better allocation and greater generation of resources. Reduction in income disparity. The aim of fiscal policy is to ensure equality in distribution of income. In India, we have progressive system of taxation to ensure that the rich are taxed more than the people from lower income groups. Price stability and control of inflation. Controlling and stabilizing prices are one of the most important objectives of fiscal policy. Government tries to control fiscal deficit and improve the utilization of resources. Employment generation. The government is making every possible effort to increase employment in the country through effective fiscal measures. Investment in infrastructure has resulted in direct and indirect employment. Lower taxes and duties on small scale industries (SSI) units encourage more investment and consequently generate more employment. Various rural employment programs have been undertaken by the Government of India to solve problems in rural areas. Similarly, self-employment scheme is taken to provide employment to technically qualified persons in the urban areas. Fiscal policy has a large impact on every section of the society. From poor to rich, everyone is affected by such a policy. The instruments or tools of this kind of policy are taxation, borrowings and deficit financing. Though there are gaps in India's fiscal policy, there is also an urgent need for making India's fiscal policy a rationalized and growth-oriented one. The success of fiscal policy depends upon taking timely measures and their effective administration during implementation. If fiscal policy is there and there are proper measures being taken under it, then it is important to make heed, as this policy is required for our development. We will now focus on the effect of fiscal incentives and disincentives on economic environment. Economic instruments or fiscal instruments can provide incentives or disincentives. Economic or fiscal incentives or disincentives are widely used policy instruments to realize a given sought after result. Examples of such incentives are taxes, subsidies, soft loans, rebates, emission allowances, and public procurement programs, etc. Governments can change its instruments to give incentives or disincentives for economic efficiency. Some of the ways are: first, imposition of taxes on harmful products can impact consumption habits of people. Second, providing subsidies, say environmental subsidies, to effect related activities and people behavior. Third, waiving of loans, say for farmers to increase agriculture practices and help farmers. Fourth, imposition of control taxes or checks to reduce level of pollution. Fifth, increase in personal taxes of consumer to reduce demand and control inflation. Sixth, increase or decrease in taxes for a particular segment to have efficient allocation of resources. Seventh, fiscal mechanisms are not always apt as impartial apparatuses where the substances under control can result in localized adverse effects, that is, toxic substances that accumulate in the environment. Ninth, sometimes legal liabilities are charged on those whose activities have resulted in harm to the society. We shall now throw some light on how the budgetary resources of an economy are allocated for balanced economic growth and economic stability. A budget is a statement of allocation of scarce resources to achieve predefined objectives for a specific time period. It is the financial plan of how an economy will receive and spend money for the fiscal period. The budget is the most powerful instrument of economic policy. Through it, the government creates and sustains the public economy consisting of the provision for public services and public investment at the same time. Through it, a government can reallocate resources according to national priorities, redistribution, promotion of private savings and investments, and the maintenance of stability. Thus, the budget should be such that it helps in the sustenance and growth of the public economy and in the pursuit of the broader objectives of fiscal policy. This implies that the methods of raising resources for the public sector should be such as to influence the rest of the economy in beneficial ways, and within the public economy itself, resources must be used in the most efficient way. Budget is a kind of revenue and expenditure statement of an economy. Government has two tools in its hands, that is, taxes and subsidies, to have balanced economic growth, which can be achieved by wise allocation of resources in a number of ways. The main objective behind allocation of funds is the welfare of citizens. These programs could be medical programs, environmental programs, housing programs, etc. Funds are also allocated for highways construction, utility services, houses construction, etc. Some other programs are also undertaken, like education programs, employment programs, debt servicing, repayment of borrowings administration, personnel and other general costs. Let's now understand how the different instruments of fiscal policy help to achieve its objectives. Fiscal policy serves as an important tool to influence the aggregate demand. As we have mentioned above, the instruments of fiscal policy are government spending and taxation. Depending upon existing situation of the economy, government can employ either expansionary or contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy increases the aggregate demand, whereas contractionary or deflationary fiscal policy reduces the aggregate demand. We shall now discuss some other major objectives of fiscal policy. These are: first, full employment. Unemployment has to be removed from every economy to get good growth of every individual. A government can do so by increasing the level of its spending for such purpose, by reducing the taxes to be paid by those who do not earn much, by giving incentives, say less tax or subsidy, for those firms which generate employment. A government may have a combination of both, that is, less tax and more subsidy policy. Although it is not easy to have full employment, but yes, we can have maximum employment level. Second, price stability. Both sharp rise and sharp fall in general price level are not desirable. It is because sharp rise in prices makes many goods and services unaffordable to the consumers, whereas Sharp fall in prices discourages the producers to produce goods and services. So, price stability is desirable. This can be achieved by having more productivity so that there are enough goods to meet the rising demand and keep prices stable. Third, economic growth. As mentioned earlier, fiscal policy helps to achieve economic growth. This can be done if resources are used to have best possible outcome. It means that there should not be underutilization of resources. Efforts must always be there to have the highest GDP growth rate. Fourth, resource allocation. Government should play a wise role in allocation of resources. It should help in the best allocation of resources. Attempts should always be made to remove resources from productive sectors to unproductive sectors.
Let us now recapitulate what we have learned so far. Fiscal policy is a policy of government. It involves the use of taxes and subsidies for achieving predefined economic objectives. It is the duty of our economic planners or policy makers to use these instruments of fiscal policy wisely in resource allocation. This policy plays an apex role for price stabilization, economic growth, resource allocation, etc. Government must always check that taxes are such which promote the good of economy and not the bad. But fiscal policy is not the only means that the government possesses to steer the economy. There is a monetary policy as well, which has its hand in all this process, and fiscal and monetary policy work together.